In the year 336 BCE, a 20-year-old king ascended the throne of Macedon and set in motion a journey that would reshape the ancient world. By the age of 30, Alexander III of Macedon, better known as Alexander the Great, had forged one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece and Egypt all the way to the frontiers of India. He was undefeated in battle, renowned as one of history's greatest military commanders. Yet, his meteoric rise to glory came at a tremendous cost. This is a story of breathtaking conquests and personal tragedy, of glory and grief entwined. Alexander's charisma and courage inspired unmatched loyalty. He had the ability to motivate his army to achieve the impossible. But his character was also full of contradictions, especially in his later years. As we travel through his life, from youthful prince to world conqueror, we will witness the epic journey of Alexander the Great, a chronologically told saga of ambition, triumph, psychological evolution, and the heavy price of greatness. Grab a seat and prepare for a conversational yet riveting ride through history as we follow Alexander's footsteps across continents and into legend. The rise of a legend. A statue of Alexander the Great on his horse, Bucephalus, in Thessaloniki. Alexander's youthful taming of the wild Bucephalus became an early sign of his destiny. Alexander was born in July 356 BCE in Pella, the capital of ancient Macedonia, in modern-day northern Greece. He was the son of King Philip II of Macedon and Queen Olympias of Epirus, one of Philip's several wives. From childhood, Alexander was instilled with a sense of destiny. Olympias told him he was of divine birth, claiming lineage from heroes and gods. As one historian puts it, from his earliest days, Olympias had encouraged him to believe that he was a descendant of heroes and gods. Nothing he had accomplished would have discouraged this belief. This belief in his own, almost supernatural mission would later fuel Alexander's unyielding confidence and ambition. Philip II, a brilliant general in his own right, was often away fighting wars to expand Macedon's power. Even in absence, Philip loomed large in Alexander's upbringing as a role model of leadership and military skill. Importantly, Philip ensured his son received a superb education. He hired none other than the great philosopher Aristotle to tutor Alexander from age 13 to 16. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander developed a love of knowledge, philosophy, music, and art. This broad education not only sharpened Alexander's intellect, but also taught him about Greek ethos and culture, lessons that would later influence how he governed the many nations he conquered. Aristotle's teachings infused him with a love of knowledge and culture, and imparted the idea that different people's customs should be respected. This was rare wisdom for a conqueror and would partly explain Alexander's willingness to embrace foreign cultures in the years ahead. From a young age, Alexander hungered to prove himself. A famous anecdote from his youth showcases his courage and boldness: the taming of Bucephalus. Bucephalus was a magnificent but ferocious warhorse that none of Philip's grooms could manage until Alexander stepped in. According to the ancient biographer Plutarch, the 12-year-old prince noticed the stallion was afraid of its own shadow and cleverly turned the horse toward the sun to calm it. Displaying fearless confidence, Alexander mounted the great horse and rode it at full gallop, to the astonishment of onlookers. When he returned successfully, Philip II wept for joy and kissed his son, declaring, "O my son, look thee out a kingdom equal to and worthy of thyself, for Macedonia is too little for thee." This proud proclamation that Macedonia was too small to contain Alexander's potential was a prophetic glimpse into the future. Bucephalus became Alexander's beloved companion in battle for the next 2 decades, and the story of taming the wild horse became legend, symbolizing Alexander's genius for overcoming the impossible. Alexander spent his teen years shadowing his father on military campaigns and learning statecraft. At just 16, while Philip was away on campaign, Alexander was entrusted as regent of Macedon. In this capacity, he crushed a rebellion by a Thracian tribe, the Maadi, even founding a new city, Alexandroupolis, named after himself as a mark of victory. This early taste of command and glory further stoked his desire to emulate and surpass his father. However, the relationship between father and son grew complicated. Philip's multiple marriages and new children made Alexander uncertain about his status as heir. Ancient sources suggest Alexander began to resent his father's philandering and the potential rivals for the throne. At one point, after a particularly volatile quarrel, King Philip even exiled Olympias, Alexander's mother, and briefly considered a new heir, straining his bond with Alexander. Nonetheless, Philip's assassination in 336 BCE abruptly ended any rivalry and thrust Alexander into power far sooner than anyone anticipated. A new king and a bold plan. In the summer of 336 BCE, Philip II was assassinated by one of his bodyguards during a public celebration. The sudden murder of Philip, possibly the result of a personal grudge, though some suspected a wider conspiracy, left the Macedonian kingdom in a precarious state. At just 20 years old, Alexander was proclaimed king. He moved decisively to secure his grip on power, showing a ruthless edge when necessary. First, he eliminated potential rivals within his family, including executing 2 princes of the royal family, ensuring there was no immediate challenge to his succession, a bloody but common practice in the ancient world's politics of survival. Then he turned his attention to the restive corners of Philip's dominions. Several conquered Greek city-states and Balkan tribes saw Philip's death as an opportunity to shake off Macedonian rule. Alexander responded with remarkable speed and force. In a series of whirlwind campaigns in 335 BCE, he marched north to quash rebellions in Thrace and Illyria, then swung south to Greece. The most famous example was Thebes, a major Greek city that had rebelled upon rumors of Alexander's death. Alexander arrived at Thebes's gates with his army almost before the Thebans realized he had moved. In the battle that followed, Alexander's forces stormed Thebes and brutally destroyed the city as punishment and warning. Ancient accounts say he left only houses of temples and of the poet Pindar standing, erasing the rest of Thebes from the map. According to one historian, Alexander torched Thebes in order to send a message to all of Greece. Do not rebel against Macedon. The shock of Thebes's fate indeed cowed other Greek states into compliance, all except Sparta, which refused to submit to Macedonian hegemony. Sparta's defiance was largely symbolic. When they later provoked a brief war in 331 BCE, Alexander's regent Antipater defeated them, ending Sparta's challenge. With Greece and the Balkan frontiers pacified by late 335 BCE, Alexander was firmly in control at home. Now the young king could turn to the grand enterprise that had been his father's dream, the invasion of the mighty Persian Empire. For over a century, the Persian Achaemenid Empire had loomed as the superpower of the known world, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley. Philip II had planned a pan-Hellenic war to punish Persia for its ancient invasions of Greece and to liberate Greek cities under Persian rule. That vision fell to Alexander. In 334 BCE, after reorganizing his army and securing the backing of the Greek League of Corinth, which named him hegemon, or leader of the war against Persia, Alexander embarked on the campaign of conquest that would earn him the title the Great. Alexander justified his invasion with high ideals of revenge and liberation. As historian Paul Cartledge notes, Alexander's official reason was to lead the allied Greeks in a war of liberation, to free forever from Persian control the Greek cities along the Anatolian coast, and in so doing also to exact revenge for the Persians' invasion of Greece under King Xerxes in 480 to 479 BCE. This rallying cry harkened back to the Persian Wars 150 years earlier, framing Alexander's war as rightful payback for Persian aggression. like the burning of Athens in 480 BCE. The pan-Hellenic propaganda helped unify the Greeks behind him. Ironically, however, Alexander's war would also see Greeks fighting Greeks on foreign soil. Many Greek mercenaries fought for the Persian king Darius III, and even Sparta, long Persia's nemesis, at one point sought Persian aid against Alexander. These ironies were not lost on Alexander, but they did not deter him. Whether driven by personal ambition, destiny, or genuine pan-Hellenic sentiment, likely all three, Alexander was determined to take on the largest empire of his time. With approximately 40,000 soldiers, a coalition of battle-hardened Macedonian phalangites, elite companion cavalry, and allied Greek troops, he crossed the Hellespont, the Dardanelles Strait, into Asia Minor in spring 334 BCE, carrying with him the hopes of conquest and the mantle of his father's legacy. Clash with the Persian Empire. Alexander wasted no time engaging the Persians. His first major test came at the Battle of the Granicus River in May 334 BCE, shortly after landing in Asia Minor, modern Turkey. A Persian army of local satraps, governors, gathered to oppose him on the far bank of the Granicus. They likely assumed the young invader would be easily repelled. Alexander, however, boldly chose a direct assault across the river. Leading from the front as always, clad in shining armor and a white-plumed helmet, he charged through the river's currents into a hail of Persian arrows. In the vicious fighting that ensued, Alexander's forces routed the Persian cavalry and Greek mercenaries supporting them. The ancient historian Arrian records that around 20,000 Persian horsemen and an equal number of foot soldiers were defeated that day. During the melee, Alexander himself was nearly killed. Historians later noted that a Persian nobleman struck Alexander's helmet with a sword and almost felled him until one of Alexander's officers, Clitus the Black, intervened and saved the king's life, an act that would tragically be remembered in a dark moment to come. In the aftermath of Granicus, Alexander's first victory, the road lay open for him to march along the western coast of Asia Minor. City after city submitted to him, and he made a point of freeing the Greek cities of Ionia from Persian rule, installing democracies in place of Persian-backed tyrants. He also took the strategic city of Sardis and deprived the Persian navy of harbor bases, essentially neutralizing Persia's naval advantage in the Aegean. These early campaigns won Alexander prestige as a liberator, and they ensured his army would not be threatened from the rear as it advanced deeper into Asia. Marching through Phrygia, Alexander paused at the city of Gordium in 333 BCE, where legend held an oracle in the form of a tangled knot, the Gordian knot. An ancient prophecy promised that whoever could untie this impossible knot would become ruler of all Asia. Alexander, never one for unsolvable problems, took a bold approach. He drew his sword and simply sliced through the knot. Alexander has cut the Gordian knot became a metaphor for solving a complex problem with a bold stroke. It was a fitting symbol of his mindset, lateral thinking and audacity in pursuit of destiny. Whether or not one believes the prophecy, Alexander certainly did. After cutting the knot, he eagerly embraced the idea that the gods had marked him as Asia's future king. By late 333 BCE, Alexander's forces moved southeast into Cilicia, where the young Persian king Darius III had finally taken the field to oppose him. The clash came in November 333 at the Battle of Issus, on the coast of what is now southern Turkey. This was the first direct confrontation between Alexander and Darius, and the stakes were enormous. Persia's great king had mustered a huge army, vastly outnumbering the Macedonians. Ancient sources like Arrian claim Darius commanded some 600,000 troops at Issus, likely a gross exaggeration. Modern historians suggest perhaps 100,000, still outnumbering Alexander's approximately 40,000. Darius had chosen a broad plain in northern Syria to deploy his massive force effectively, but Alexander did not oblige him by fighting there. Instead, Alexander stalled, and Darius, impatient and misreading the situation as Macedonian fear, advanced into the narrow coastal strip near Issus to attack Alexander. This move proved to be a blunder for Darius. The mountains hemmed in the battlefield, nullifying the Persians' numerical advantage. In the fierce battle that followed, Alexander led a ferocious cavalry charge that punched through the Persian lines. At the critical moment, he and his companion cavalry targeted Darius himself. The sight of Alexander bearing down caused Darius to lose his nerve. The great king panicked and fled, riding away in his chariot while his army crumbled around him. The rout was total. In Darius's hasty flight from Issus, his royal family was left behind. Alexander captured Darius's wife, mother, and children, a potentially humiliating and politically sensitive situation. Yet Alexander showed a measure of chivalry and a savvy understanding of image. He treated the Persian royal captives with great respect, ensuring Darius's family was honored and addressed as royalty, according to Arrian. When Darius later offered a rich ransom and even proposed a political alliance, including the hand of one of his daughters, in exchange for his family, Alexander dramatically rebuffed the offer. He sent Darius a letter declaring, "In the future, whenever you send word to me, address me as King of Asia, and not as an equal, as the master of all that belonged to you." In other words, Alexander now viewed himself, not without reason, as the rightful ruler of the Persian Empire. It was an astonishing claim from a 23-year-old Macedonian king, but after Issus, it was hard to argue otherwise. With this victory, Alexander secured the eastern Mediterranean coast. Darius escaped to raise another army, but the psychological edge had shifted to Alexander, who demonstrated that Persian might could be overcome by superior strategy and sheer force of will. Master of Asia. After the victory at Issus, Alexander did not immediately pursue Darius into the heart of Persia. He first turned south, toward the rich Phoenician and Egyptian territories still under Persian control. His goal was strategic, to secure every coastline and deny the Persian navy any foothold in the Mediterranean. Many cities opened their gates to him in fear or admiration, but the island city of Tyre in Phoenicia dared to resist. The siege of Tyre in 332 BCE became one of Alexander's most legendary sieges, a demonstration of his ingenuity and determination against a nearly impregnable target. Tyre was a fortified city-state on an island, surrounded by high walls and the sea. Lacking a strong navy, Alexander's solution was bold and unprecedented. He ordered the construction of a massive causeway, mole, stretching from the mainland to the island. For months his men labored, building a land bridge in the face of Tyrian attacks. They pushed siege towers across the makeshift causeway to bombard the walls. After 7 long months and heavy losses, Alexander's army finally breached Tyre's defenses in July 332 BCE. The enraged Macedonians took a harsh revenge. Thousands of Tyrians were killed or sold into slavery as punishment for their defiance. The fall of Tyre sent shockwaves across the east. It proved that not even the sea could protect Alexander's enemies. Incidentally, the causeway permanently changed Tyre's geography. Silt deposits gradually built up along it, turning Tyre's island into a peninsula over centuries. With Tyre captured and the Persian fleet now deprived of ports, Alexander had effectively neutralized Persian naval power for good. Continuing south, Alexander seized Gaza after another brief siege and then marched unopposed into Egypt in late 332 BCE. In Egypt, he found a land that resented Persian rule and was ripe for a liberator. The Egyptians welcomed Alexander as a conquering hero, or even as a savior. Without a fight, he took control of this ancient and wealthy civilization. During his 6-month stay in Egypt, Alexander undertook several actions that would leave a lasting legacy. Along the Nile Delta, he founded the city of Alexandria in early 331 BCE. Legend says he himself marked out the plan of the city with flour, envisioning a grand metropolis and port. Indeed, Alexandria, Egypt would grow to become one of the most important cities in the ancient world, home to the famous Library of Alexandria, arguably the most successful of the many cities he named after himself. Alexander also sought validation of his divine status in Egypt. He made a long and arduous journey across the desert to the oasis of Siwa, where stood the oracle of the god Ammon, whom Greeks equated with Zeus. There, according to later accounts, the priests greeted Alexander as the son of Ammon or Zeus, essentially confirming his semi-divine lineage. We do not know exactly what was said. Arian enigmatically reports that the oracle gave Alexander a satisfying answer to his questions, but Plutarch claims the high priest called him son of Zeus, and Alexander thereafter often referred to Zeus Ammon as his true father. True or not, this experience seemed to deeply reinforce Alexander's sense of destiny and invincibility. Before leaving Egypt, Alexander was officially crowned pharaoh in the traditional manner at Memphis, ingratiating himself with the Egyptian populace and priesthood. In Egyptian style, he was declared the son of Ra and beloved of Amun, securing his legitimacy as their ruler. Few foreign conquerors had so smoothly integrated themselves into Egyptian tradition. But then, few conquerors were like Alexander. He displayed a knack for cultural adaptability that would become a hallmark of his rule. By mid-331 BCE, Alexander left Egypt and marched eastward, intent on finally confronting Darius III again and taking the heartlands of Persia. Darius had used the respite to assemble another gigantic army from all corners of his empire. The decisive showdown came in October 331 BCE on the plain of Gaugamela in Mesopotamia, near modern Erbil in Iraq. The Battle of Gaugamela is often regarded as Alexander's greatest victory, a masterclass in generalship against overwhelming odds. Darius III had learned from Issus and chose an open, flat plain where his superior numbers and chariots could maneuver effectively. Some ancient estimates put the Persian host at 1,000,000 men, though historians suggest approximately 100,000. Still far larger than Alexander's approximately 50,000. Darius's forces included war chariots with scythe blades and even war elephants brought from India's frontiers, a frightening new element to the Greeks. Facing perhaps the largest army ever assembled against him, Alexander once again personally led his elite cavalry in a daring charge. He employed a bold oblique attack, concentrating force at a point in the Persian line to create a gap. In the thick of ferocious hand-to-hand combat, Alexander and his companion cavalry managed to punch through towards Darius. Arrian describes the moment. For a brief period, the fighting was hand-to-hand, but when Alexander and his horsemen pressed the enemy hard, Darius, who had long been in a state of dread, now saw terrors all around him. He wheeled about, the first to do so, and fled. Once again, the sight of the Persian king fleeing caused panic and collapse in his army. The Macedonian phalanx and cavalry cut the Persians to pieces, while Darius escaped with a handful of guards. Gaugamela sealed the fate of the Persian Empire. As one historian succinctly put it, after that victory, the Persian Empire, the rest of it, is at Alexander's mercy. Indeed, within weeks, Alexander marched triumphantly into the key Persian capitals. The city of Babylon welcomed him as a liberator. Susa, with its immense treasury, surrendered. And finally, Bucephalus, the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid dynasty, fell into Alexander's hands in early 330 BCE. In a symbolic act of vengeance and perhaps self-indulgent celebration, Alexander burned the great palace of Bucephalus to the ground. Ancient sources debate his motives. Some say he was drunk and egged on by a courtesan who claimed it would avenge Xerxes' burning of Athens. while others suggest it was a calculated message that the old Persian order was utterly finished. Either way, the palace that had been the pride of Darius and his ancestors went up in flames. Alexander soon regretted this destruction. Arrian says he gave orders to stop the fire, realizing he'd destroyed a wonder, but the deed was done. The ruins of Persepolis remain a stark testament to that night, when glory, conquest of Persia, tipped into grief, the loss of a cultural treasure. Not long after, the fugitive Darius III met an inglorious end. Fleeing northward into what is now Iran, Darius was betrayed and murdered by his own cousin and satrap Bessus in mid-330 BCE. When Alexander finally caught up, he found Darius dead in a wagon, allegedly with wounds from his betrayers. Alexander was reportedly saddened by the Persian king's pitiable fate. He sent Darius's body back to Persepolis for an honorable royal funeral and burial in the tradition of Achaemenid kings. This respectful treatment of a rival was both genuine — Alexander often showed admiration for brave or noble enemies — and pragmatic. By giving Darius a proper burial as a fallen king, Alexander hoped to win favor with the Persian people and present himself as Darius's rightful successor. Indeed, many Persians did begin to acknowledge Alexander as the new great king after Gaugamela. He started adopting the dress and some court rituals of Persian royalty, a decision that would soon cause tension with his Macedonian officers. By 330 BCE, Alexander the Great was, in title and in fact, king of Asia, master of the entire Persian Empire. At 26 years old, he had achieved what few could even dream, toppling a 200-year-old superpower and claiming its treasures and territories for himself. His empire now stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Hindu Kush. In the flush of victory, Alexander began to see his mission in even grander terms. No longer just a Greek avenger, he cast himself as a universal monarch. He famously did not force Greek culture on conquered peoples. Rather, he often honored their local customs and deities. One of Alexander's philosophies, influenced by Aristotle, was that while he would take away a nation's freedom to wage war or rebel, he wouldn't take away its culture. In practice, this meant he left local administrations intact when possible, incorporated Persians and others into his army and court, and even started wearing Persian-style robes and adopting Persian court etiquette. He encouraged marriages between his officers and native women. This policy of fusion was enlightened for its time, aiming to create a new blended ruling class. However, many Macedonians were alarmed by what they saw. To them, Alexander was becoming too Persian, betraying Macedonian ways and the memory of Philip. This cultural tension would soon contribute to conflict within Alexander's own ranks, even as he pressed on to new horizons. He started adopting the dress and some court rituals of Persian royalty, a decision that would soon cause tension with his Macedonian officers. Beyond Persia, even after conquering the Persian Empire, Alexander's ambition was unquenched. Upon securing the Persian heartland, he turned his forces eastward, determined to push to the very edge of the known world. From 330 to 327 BCE, Alexander led his army through the rugged regions of Central Asia, Bactria and Sogdiana, roughly modern Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, in pursuit of consolidation and further glory. These campaigns were among the toughest of his journey, marked by guerrilla warfare, harsh winters, and a resilient local resistance. It was a rocky, frost-bitten conflict, as one historian describes it. Alexander won numerous small battles and sieges, but the strain on his army was growing. For the first time, Alexander's men showed signs of fatigue and homesickness, and Alexander himself began exhibiting a darker side, becoming less trusting and more harsh to keep control. During this period, Alexander's psychological evolution accelerated. The constant threats and a few real conspiracies made him increasingly paranoid about plots and betrayal. The most infamous incident was the so-called Philotas conspiracy in 330 BCE. Philotas, commander of the companion cavalry and son of trusted General Parmenion, was accused of failing to report an alleged plot against Alexander's life. Whether this plot was real or fabricated remains debated, but Alexander acted decisively and ruthlessly. He had Philotas executed for treason and, fearing retribution from Philotas's powerful father, sent secret orders that led to Parmenion's assassination as well. Parmenion, who had been Philip II's right-hand man and a father figure to Alexander, was stabbed to death by officers on Alexander's orders, despite being uninvolved in any conspiracy. This shocking move eliminated a potential rival but likely haunted Alexander, as it strained the loyalty of some Macedonian officers who revered Parmenion. Another flashpoint came in 328 BCE during a banquet in the fortress of Maracanda, Sogdian territory. Alexander's army had taken the Sogdian Rock, a seemingly impregnable cliff fortress, by scaling its heights with a small team of climbers, a feat that led to the surrender of Oxyartes, a local noble. In the aftermath, Alexander met Oxyartes' daughter, the beautiful Roxana, and fell in love. He took Roxana as his wife, a rare instance of Alexander marrying for love, though it also had political benefit by uniting him with a prominent Sogdian family. This marriage was a happy note in an otherwise tense campaign. Roxana would eventually bear Alexander a posthumous son, Alexander IV. Though tragically, mother and child's fortunes after Alexander's death would be grim. But even this joyous event could not alleviate the mounting strain among his men. Shortly after, at a drunken celebration, a bitter confrontation erupted between Alexander and his friend Clitus the Black, the same Clitus who had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus. Clitus was upset by Alexander's adoption of Persian customs, and openly voiced that Alexander was forgetting his Macedonian roots and the contributions of his old comrades. He even raised his hand and exclaimed, "This is the hand, Alexander, that saved you then," referring to Granicus, implying Alexander was now ungrateful. Enraged and likely inebriated, Alexander's temper flared uncontrollably. In a horrific moment, he snatched a spear and lunged at Clitus, impaling him and killing his loyal friend in front of all. The banquet fell into stunned silence. Almost immediately, Alexander was struck with remorse. Realizing he had murdered one of his dearest companions, Alexander's fury turned to despair. Arrian recounts that Alexander was terribly affected. He wept and castigated himself as a murderer, refusing food or drink for 3 days in a paroxysm of grief and guilt. His officers had to practically beg him to resume command. This incident revealed how Alexander's grief could match his glory. He was a man capable of immense passion, both in ambition and in regret. It also demonstrated the increasing toll that years of warfare, constant danger, and heavy drinking had taken on his psyche. Despite these internal conflicts, Alexander's military drive did not slow. Once Bactria and Sogdiana were subdued, Alexander founded new cities there, including Alexandria Eschate, the farthest. He set his sights even further east, into the land the Greeks called India, parts of modern Pakistan and northwest India. In 326 BCE, with a reforged army that now included contingents of Persians and other Asians, Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush and Indus River, entering the Punjab region. He was venturing beyond the Persian Empire, into unknown realms European Greeks had only heard of in fables. Alexander's invasion of India proved both triumphant and arduous, adding new chapters to his legend. To the ends of the earth, Alexander's first major challenge in the Indian campaign was at the Hydaspes River, Jhelum River, in 326 BCE, where he confronted King Porus, Purushottama, a local Punjabi ruler renowned for his formidable army, including war elephants, which were entirely new to the Macedonians. The Battle of the Hydaspes would be one of Alexander's hardest-fought victories. Porus, a towering man said to be nearly 7 feet tall, arrayed his forces on the far side of the swollen Hydaspes, confident that the river and his elephants gave him an unbeatable defensive edge. Alexander, refusing to charge headlong as he had at Granicus, employed strategic deception. He kept Porus guessing for weeks by moving his troops up and down the riverbank. Then, in a stormy night, Alexander secretly ferried a strike force across the river upstream. Porus woke to find Alexander's army on his side of the Hydaspes and hurried to meet him, leaving part of his own force behind on the original bank, due to Alexander's feints. On the plain beyond the river, Porus deployed 200 elephants at the forefront of his army. These beasts, each with archers and javelin throwers on their backs, formed a living wall that Alexander's men had never seen before. As battle commenced, the elephants lumbered forward, creating chaos and fear with their sheer size. Alexander's solution was to use his superior cavalry tactics once again. He sent his companion cavalry and allied horsemen sweeping around the flanks of Porus's formation. The more lightly armed Indian cavalry guarding the wings were outmaneuvered and driven off. Alexander's phalanx, meanwhile, engaged Porus's infantry in the center. Macedonian soldiers focused their attacks on the elephants. They hurled javelins and shot arrows at them from a distance. Many elephants, wounded and enraged, stampeded back and forth, trampling troops on both sides indiscriminately. Despite the bedlam, or perhaps because of it, Alexander kept his cool and exploited the disorder. His cavalry charged into the gaps, isolating groups of enemy infantry. After a brutal, exhausting fight in monsoon rains, the Macedonians gradually gained the upper hand. King Porus, mounted atop his biggest elephant, refused to yield until his army was largely annihilated. He was finally surrounded, wounded, and captured. When Alexander approached the defeated king, he asked how Porus wished to be treated. "Treat me like a king," Porus answered, displaying undiminished pride. Struck by Porus's bravery and dignified request, Alexander did exactly that. He not only spared Porus's life, but restored him to govern his kingdom as Alexander's ally. Porus would remain a loyal vassal, and this magnanimity paid off. Rather than trying to hold the Punjab with Macedonian governors, Alexander trusted Porus to keep order on his behalf. The Battle of Hydaspes thus ended in Alexander's victory and an example of his tactical brilliance and capacity for respect towards a courageous foe. The cost of the victory, however, was high. Large numbers of Alexander's men were injured or killed in the fierce fight, and even those who survived were unnerved by the devastating power of the elephants. Perhaps the deepest personal blow to Alexander was the loss of his dear warhorse Bucephalus. Accounts differ on whether Bucephalus was wounded in the battle or simply succumbed to old age. The stallion was about 30 by then, but all agree that Bucephalus died shortly after the Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BCE. Alexander was devastated. This horse had been his companion since that fateful day in Pella when he tamed it as a boy. Bucephalus had carried Alexander through every major battle from Greece to India, sharing in the glory of each victory. Now, Alexander gave his beloved horse a hero's farewell. He staged a royal funeral for Bucephalus and reportedly wept openly at the sight of his lifeless companion. To immortalize the memory of Bucephalus, Alexander founded a city on the Hydaspes and named it Alexandria Bucephala, modern-day Phalia in Pakistan. In this act, we see the grief that paralleled Alexander's glory. Even as he won one of his greatest battles, he lost something irreplaceable on a deeply personal level. After Hydaspes, Alexander's army marched east to the Thebes River, called Hephaestus by the Greeks. Beyond it lay the vast Gangetic Plain and the powerful Nanda Empire of India, an unknown quantity that might field armies even larger than Darius's. Here, at the Hephaestus, Alexander's troops reached their limit. For a decade, they had campaigned from the Aegean to the Himalayas, and they were exhausted and homesick. The hardships of the Indian climate, torrential rains, strange diseases, and the prospect of facing endless new enemies finally broke their resolve. When Alexander pressed them to continue eastward, his officers and men mutinied, respectfully but firmly. One of his generals, Conus, spoke on behalf of the army, imploring Alexander to turn back and not force the Macedonians to drivel on to the end of the world. This was a pivotal moment. For the first time, Alexander's army refused to follow him. The great conqueror was bitterly disappointed. Some sources say he sulked in his tent for 3 days, hoping the men would change their minds. But eventually he saw that he could not conquer Asia with a mutinous army. With tears of frustration, Alexander agreed to end his eastward march. He marked the spot with 12 altars to the gods, as if to symbolize that this was the furthest point of his empire, and then ordered the retreat. The dream of marching to the Eastern Ocean, and perhaps finding the end of the world, had to die. A sobering moment of humility for a man who had come to think nothing was impossible for him. In this decision, we see Alexander's pragmatic side. He knew when to concede to reality, albeit reluctantly. Turning back, Alexander organized an epic journey home that proved nearly as challenging as the campaigns of conquest. He built a fleet of boats and in 325 BCE led part of his forces down the Indus River, fighting as they went. During one siege against the Mali tribe, Alexander's recklessness nearly cost him his life. Eager to inspire his troops, he was first over the enemy wall, leaping inside with only 2 companions. Before reinforcements could scale up behind him, Alexander was beset by Malian defenders. An arrow struck him in the chest, penetrating his lung. He collapsed, bleeding and unconscious. Believing their king was at the brink of death, the enraged Macedonians stormed the city with fury and rescued him, then slaughtered the Malians. Alexander's lung wound was so severe that for weeks he hovered near death. At one point, it's said he lost the ability to speak. Yet astonishingly, he recovered, demonstrating once more a seemingly superhuman resilience. When he showed himself alive to his anxious troops, their relief and adoration were immense. Alexander's willingness to risk everything alongside his men had always won their hearts, and even after this close call, he remained true to that style of leadership. After reaching the Indus Delta and the Indian Ocean, fulfilling, incidentally, an age-old Greek aspiration to reach the outer sea, Alexander split his forces into 3 groups for the return west. One group, under his admiral Nearchus, would sail along the coast back toward Mesopotamia. Another would march northward through a safer route. Alexander himself, never choosing the easy path, decided to lead the bulk of his army through the Gedrosian Desert, in today's southern Pakistan and Iran. Some speculate he wanted to imitate the mythical hero Semiramis, or Cyrus the Great, who legendarily failed to cross this desert. Alexander might have wanted to succeed where others perished. Whatever his reasons, the Gedrosia crossing in late 325 BCE was a nightmare. Scorching heat, waterless stretches, and sparse supplies devastated the column. According to one chronicler, the burning heat and lack of water destroyed a great part of the army, particularly the pack animals. The hardships were beyond anything they had endured before. Men went mad from thirst, hundreds collapsed each day, and many of those who lagged simply vanished in the dunes. By the time Alexander stumbled out of the desert into civilization in early 324 BCE, 3/4 of his army had reportedly died. It was one of Alexander's few major failures, born out of overreach. The grief for the countless soldiers and followers lost in Gedrosia weighed heavily. Yet Alexander's own credibility with his troops survived even this calamity, largely because he shared the suffering equally. Famously, when a helmet of precious water was offered to him in the desert, he poured it into the sand in front of his army, refusing to drink when his soldiers had none, a gesture that uplifted their spirits even as their bodies ached. Anecdotes like this, though not in contemporary records, illustrate the kind of leader his men believed him to be. In 324 BCE, Alexander and the remnants of his army finally reached the western boundaries of the Persian Empire again, reuniting in the city of Susa. Here, Alexander sought to heal the rift between his Macedonian officers and the new Persian reality of his empire. He staged the Susa weddings, a grand mass marriage ceremony. Alexander himself married two high-born Persian women, Statera II, a daughter of Darius III, and Parysatis, a daughter of the previous king Artaxerxes III. He already had Roxana as a wife, so these new marriages were purely political, intended to link him to the Persian royal lineage. On the same day, he compelled or encouraged around 80 of his top companions to take Persian noblewomen as wives as well. The weddings were lavish, a symbolic union of Greek and Persian cultures. Thousands of Macedonian soldiers were also encouraged to marry local women. Despite the pageantry, these measures were unpopular with many of the Macedonians, who saw them as an affront to their traditions. Most of those arranged marriages didn't last long after Alexander's death. Alexander's vision of a blended empire was ahead of its time and met with resistance. He even arranged for Persian youths to be trained in the Macedonian military style and integrated into his army, a move that caused a mutiny at Opis when Macedonian veterans felt they were being replaced. Alexander managed to quell that mutiny with a dramatic reconciliation speech, but the tensions persisted. Amid these events came the most devastating personal blow of Alexander's life. In autumn 324 BCE, his dearest friend, and according to some, his intimate companion, Hephaestion fell ill, likely with typhoid or another fever, and died at the age of 32. Alexander's reaction was nothing short of agonized. Hephaestion had been by his side since childhood, a fellow student of Aristotle, his confidant and second in command. Some accounts claim Alexander's grief was extreme. He wept for days, refused to eat, and cut his hair short in mourning, emulating Achilles' mourning for Patroclus in the Iliad. As Alexander often saw himself in Achilles' mold, he ordered a massive funeral pyre built in Babylon to honor Hephaestion's memory, reportedly spending an astronomical sum on the memorial. According to the historian Arrian, citing eyewitnesses, Alexander also asked the oracle of Zeus Ammon to deify Hephaestion as a hero, a request that was diplomatically declined. Alexander's mourning was not just personal, it verged on the unhinged. As Abernethy described, after Hephaestion's death, Alexander lost his self-control and his compassion for his men. He became reckless, self-indulgent, and inconsistent. He had always had a violent temper. The drinking made these traits worse. Indeed, in the months following, Alexander indulged in more drinking bouts and increasingly grandiose plans, perhaps trying to drown his sorrow or prove his invincibility against fate. By early 323 BCE, Alexander had returned to Babylon, the city he intended to make the administrative capital of his empire. Restless even in grief, he began planning new campaigns. He spoke of conquering the Arabian Peninsula next, and sent scouts to explore potential routes. The known world was not enough. Alexander dreamed of further oceans and continents to conquer. But at this apex of glory, grief was about to strike its final, fatal blow, the final days in Babylon. In June 323 BCE, fate caught up with Alexander the Great. It began innocuously. After a day of heavy feasting and drinking with his officers in Babylon, Alexander developed a fever. Over the next 10 days, the fever worsened. Ancient sources describe Alexander sweating, unable to cool down, gradually losing his strength and voice. The royal physicians were baffled and likely terrified. Who wants to be the doctor that fails to save Alexander? Despite various treatments, Alexander's condition declined. He was moved to his bed, where he could barely speak above a whisper. When his soldiers heard their king was dying, they supposedly filed past his room in reverent silence to see him one last time. And Alexander, speechless, still managed to raise his hand or nod to acknowledge each of them. On June 10th or 11th, 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylon, just 1 month shy of his 33rd birthday. The news sent shockwaves through the empire. The cause of Alexander's death remains an enduring mystery and subject of debate. Was it natural or foul play? Some contemporaries whispered that Alexander had been poisoned, perhaps by a conspiracy of his generals or by the royal cupbearer. There were rumors naming Antipater, his viceroy in Macedon, as a mastermind, acting through Antipater's son who was present at the banquet. However, modern medical analysis leans toward disease, possibly malaria or typhoid fever contracted in Babylon's marshes, or complications from years of heavy alcohol use and war wounds. One intriguing theory by modern scholars is that Alexander suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological disorder, which could explain the reported progression of paralysis and the fact that his body allegedly showed no immediate signs of decay, leading to later legends that he was divine or that he wasn't actually dead for days. We will likely never know for certain. What is clear is that Alexander's soldiers and subjects could not believe that their invincible king was truly gone. He had seemed larger than life. How could he die in bed, undefeated by any mortal enemy? On his deathbed, Alexander was asked, "To whom do you leave your empire?" Since he had no living heir, Roxana was pregnant, but the child not yet born, this was a critical question. According to a famous, though possibly apocryphal, account, Alexander's final words were, "I leave it to Tukratisto, to the strongest." And then, when pressed for clarity, he purportedly added that his generals should hold a huge funeral contest in his honor, a grim prophecy of the wars to come. In another version, he gave his signet ring to his officer Perdiccas, implying he should lead until the unborn son was of age. But that plan fell apart. Regardless of the exact words, what followed Alexander's death was indeed a catastrophic struggle among his top generals, known as the Diadochi, meaning successors. Alexander's untimely death, without any provision, opened the floodgates for 2 generations of warfare among his marshals for their slice of his empire, as historian Cartledge notes. Within a few years, Alexander's mother, wife, son, and half-brother were all murdered in the crossfire of these power grabs. Ultimately, by 300 BCE, Alexander's unified empire had fractured into several Hellenistic kingdoms ruled by his former friends turned rivals. Ptolemy took Egypt, Seleucus took Syria and Persia, Antigonus, and later his son took Macedonia and Greece, and so on. The grief of Alexander's passing was not just personal for those who loved him, it was civilizational, as the fragile unity he had imposed dissolved into chaos and war. Alexander was not yet 33, and he had accomplished more in a decade than most could in several lifetimes. His story is in many ways an extraordinary tragedy. Having achieved unparalleled glory, he did not live to see any lasting peace or order from it. Some might say Alexander conquered everything except his own mortality and fallibility. His life burned brilliantly and briefly like a shooting star across the sky of history. Legacy of Alexander, a 19th century map of Alexander's empire at its greatest extent. After a 10-year campaign, Alexander's conquests spanned from Greece and Egypt in the west to the Indus Valley in the east. Though the empire he built disintegrated after his death, Alexander the Great's legacy endured through the centuries. Culturally, his conquests ushered in a new era, the Hellenistic age, in which Greek language, art, and thought spread and mingled with the cultures of Egypt, the Near East, and Central Asia. This was perhaps his most significant legacy, the proliferation of Greek, Hellenic culture, far beyond its original borders. Alexandria in Egypt, the city he founded, became a thriving center of learning, home to scholars and one of the ancient world's greatest libraries. In the cities named after Alexander, there were more than 20 of them in various lands. Greek merchants and local peoples exchanged goods and ideas, spurring trade between East and West. Over time, new hybrid cultures emerged. For example, Greco-Buddhist art in India, which combined Greek artistic styles with Buddhist themes, or the fusion of Greek and Egyptian religious practices in Ptolemaic Egypt. It's a testament to Alexander's impact that, more than 300 years after his death, Greek language and culture were still dominant in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East, and would be so until the rise of Rome and beyond. Politically and militarily, later generations viewed Alexander as the gold standard of generalship. He became the measuring stick for all conquerors. Julius Caesar lamented in his 30s that he had accomplished nothing compared to Alexander at the same age. Napoleon Bonaparte admired Alexander's tactics and carried books about his campaigns. Even in modern military academies, Alexander's battles, especially his innovative use of the companion cavalry and the phalanx, are studied for their strategic brilliance. No commander in history has quite matched Alexander's combination of audacity and consistency in victory. He fought perhaps 20 major battles and many skirmishes and never lost once, a record that stands unequaled. His ability to inspire his men to march and fight across thousands of miles against overwhelming odds remains a case study in leadership. There have been many Alexanders, writes Professor Cartledge, as many as there have been observers, enemies, admirers of the man. Each era reinterprets Alexander, whether as a hero, a villain, or something in between. In myth and legend, Alexander almost ceased to be a mere man and became a character of folklore. In the Alexander Romance, a collection of fantastical stories about him that circulated in antiquity and the Middle Ages, he is depicted exploring the depths of the ocean in a diving bell, visiting the legendary Amazons, and questing for the water of life. In many languages and cultures, from Persian to Arabic, where he's called Iskandar or Dulkarnain, to medieval European texts, Alexander appears as a symbol of the quintessential explorer-conqueror, a seeker of glory and knowledge at the edges of the world. This legendary Alexander is part of his legacy too. Few historical figures have inspired such a wide array of stories across so many cultures. For all the glory Alexander attained, there is an undeniable pathos to his tale, a sense of unfulfilled potential and the heavy cost of his ambition. He achieved what he wanted, but perhaps lost what he needed. He sought to unite East and West, yet his premature death meant that unity was fleeting. He could conquer the world, but he could not conquer his own flaws or foresee the fractures his absence would create. The theme of glory and grief truly defines Alexander's journey. He experienced glory in unprecedented measure. Kings bowed to him, cities bore his name, and even today he is great. But he also experienced deep grief. He murdered dear friends in fits of temper, saw his army and companions suffer terribly, and died young, without the peace to enjoy what he had built. His life invites us to wonder, what might have happened if Alexander had lived longer? Would he have stabilized his empire and perhaps even made it last? Or was the very fire that drove him to conquer also destined to consume the empire in his absence? Ultimately, Alexander's legacy is paradoxical. On one hand, his empire fragmented, yet on the other hand, the Hellenistic civilization that followed was a direct result of his conquests and endured for centuries. Perhaps the true measure of Alexander's greatness lies not in the miles of territory he seized, but in the lasting imprint he left on the world's cultural map. As one historian reflected, there have been many Alexanders, hero and god, implying that each generation finds something in Alexander's life that speaks to human aspirations and follies. His legend remains very much alive today. Alexander the Great's epic journey from Macedonian prince to master of half the known world is a story of exhilarating triumphs and profound tragedies. It teaches us about the heights of human ambition, how one man's vision and determination can change history, and also the depths of human cost, the grief that often shadows glory. Alexander once wept, according to a later legend, because he had no more worlds to conquer. In truth, the worlds he conquered wept for him when he was gone, and have marveled at his feats ever since. His life invites us to reflect on our own dreams and demons. What would we sacrifice in pursuit of our greatest goals, and how would we handle the consequences? If you found Alexander's story as fascinating and inspiring as we do, full of lessons in leadership, strategy, and the human spirit, then join our community. Remember to hit the like button if you enjoyed this deep dive into history. Subscribe to our channel for more epic tales and insights from the past, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Comment below on what you find most interesting or poignant about Alexander the Great. Was it his fearless military genius, his attempts to blend cultures, or the personal challenges he faced? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching Glory and Grief, the epic journey of Alexander the Great. Until next time, keep exploring the stories that shaped our world, and remember that great achievements often come with great lessons. History's heroes and villains all have something to teach us, and we're here to learn and be inspired together. See you in the next video.